Welcome to Work from the Inside Out, a podcast that highlights real-life stories, practical strategies, and best practices for transitioning your career from unhappiness and dissatisfaction to fulfillment, meaning, and joy. Now here is your host, career and executive coach, Tammy Guler-Loeb.
Hey everyone, I am delighted to introduce my guest, Roman Eggenberger. Roman is a man living many lives. Banker turned barista, country bumpkin turned city boy, visitor to exhibitions turned curator of exhibitions. Having lost his reputation in a country of 40,000 souls, he handpicks the ventures for his portfolio based on connection rather than expertise or trend. Pretty intriguing. And Roman is the first person I ever met who lives in the country of Liechtenstein, which is fascinating in and of itself. Please join me in welcoming Roman Eggenberger. Welcome, Roman.
Tammy, thank you for having me.
Really happy to have you. Thank you for joining us from your home office in Liechtenstein. So, Roman, as you know, on Work from the Inside Out, we like to begin at the beginning. So tell us about your formative years and how they may have informed where you are today.
So I grew up in the Principality of Liechtenstein, one of the smallest countries on this planet.
Yeah.
And I used to be one of the shortest kids in class. So I couldn't rely on being seen. So I made sure that I was heard. I was always one of the loudest kids in class. And I could also almost always talk myself out of trouble. And whenever that didn't work, I had a good friend of mine, George. He was better with his fists than his mouth. So I would talk as long as that worked. And then I would just cede my space to George, and he would just deal with the matter however he thought fit. And that obviously had an impression on how I went through life, because I knew that one way to get through life was through conversation. And so that was definitely something that still works today for my own benefit. Now, the other thing was that my parents divorced when I was 7, and my sister and I went to day nursery, which wasn't that cool at the time. So childcare today is pretty normal. There's lots of kids go to childcare, but at the time, those were the odd kids, because the normal kids, they wouldn't go home after school, and we then went to day nursery. But my bond with my sister and my mother, as a result of it, developed very strongly. And all throughout my life, I could always rely on the support of my family. I knew that developing, maintaining those relationships was very important when I was a young boy. And as you made reference to in my bio, whatever I do nowadays is much more built on relationships than anything else. And I do believe that the bonds that I had at an early age built the foundation for those relationships very strongly. And probably the other aspect is where I live, so in Liechtenstein in Switzerland, we have that education system that has apprenticeships. Not everyone goes to uni. Right. So what I did at the age of 15, I quit school. I didn't drop out of school. I just left school at the age of 15, as lots of kids do. And then you do an apprenticeship. So that's 3 or 4 years in a company. You work 3 days a week, 2 days a week you go to school, and you learn what it means to work. You have a salary at the age of 15, pretty awesome. So I remember at the time, I had a salary of 400 Swiss francs, about $400 a month, at the age of 15, which is pretty cool, because you obviously live at home, and I could contribute to my mother's income, number one, recover some of my own expenses at a very early age. And once I completed my apprenticeship, I went to improve my French in France, went there to a language school, then went to work in Lausanne in the French-speaking part, earned more money, then went to the US and Canada to improve my English. The good thing is that at the age of 18, 19, and 20, I went to school abroad and covered all of my expenses myself.
That's amazing.
And that obviously developed my relationship with money. So I knew that I had to work in order to earn the money. And then I would always want to spend my money wisely. And especially when I went to the language schools abroad, lots of the kids had no relationship to money. The parents paid for all of the expenses they had. And I
Yeah.
always thought about, do I want to do this or not? It would have
Mhm.
been my money that I would have had to put on the table. So I
Yeah.
would say those elements definitely work in my favor,
Sure.
also at a later point in life. And
Yeah.
when I tell people nowadays that everything that I was able to do at the age of 15 was talk and count, so I was good in mathematics and I was reasonably talkative. That got me into a banking apprenticeship at the age of 15. Now at 50 plus, I'm still good with numbers and I still love to talk. So that's the bridge from 15 to 50 numbers and
Wow.
the ability to speak. Yeah.
So it's fascinating being American myself and having understanding that other countries have a different approach to how they help young people develop and engage with various academic disciplines and the world of work. It's fascinating to hear about your story, and especially that at 15 that you had the opportunity to do an apprenticeship in banking. I would have imagined it would have been perhaps something more hands-on rather than, and not to say that banking isn't hands-on. It could be, right?
Right. And that would have been the plan. So obviously the I didn't have much of an idea what I wanted to do at 15
Sure.
anyway, understandably. So the family had a plan with young Roman. And that was that I was meant to become a typographer. My
Oh.
uncle had a printing shop.
Mhm.
He had no children. The idea was if I did the apprenticeship in his shop, at some point I could become his successor and take over the printing shop. Not that I was especially talented for that, but I thought, yeah, he can do that. He can learn that. I had no arguments against it. I was pretty comfortable with that. And it was shortly before I was to start my apprenticeship that my uncle had to say, look, I have no space. I don't even have a desk for you. He was
Oh my
about to
goodness.
build a new printing shop, but at that time, he said, I cannot take on a new apprentice. We have to park you somewhere for the time being, let you do something else, and then you might want to come back at a later point in time. My cousin had already done an apprenticeship in a bank. So the family circle then decided, why don't we let the young man go into the bank where his cousin worked? And that's how I ended up in the bank. It would have never been the grand plan to get me into the bank. At the time, if you had good grades in mathematics and languages, that counted well for you. So they said it's good enough for us. I was accepted as an apprentice in that bank. It happened by accident.
Yeah, I mean, but it sounds like there were people watching out for you and giving you some guidance. I don't want to make it sound like, oh, they just shuffled you around, moved you around like a piece on a chessboard.
No, that's right. I thought that it would obviously be something that I could do well and where I would flourish anyway. And I then did my apprenticeship. Then what happens normally is that at the age of 18, 19, you would then go abroad and just improve your language skill. And the funny thing was that all of my friends went to English speaking countries,
Oh,
to the
interesting.
UK, Canada, US, Australia, all of those places. And I was the odd kid on the block because I said, I want to go to France and improve my French. Whereas
Huh.
for most of my friends, they were just happy having finished the last French lesson of their life. So I went to France for 4 months, loved it that much that I said I wanted to work in a French speaking environment.
Mhm.
And it was easier to find something in the French speaking part of Switzerland. So I sent out about 70 applications and received one reply from one
70s?
bank. That's right, from one bank. And they made me an offer and I accepted it in Lausanne. Stayed in that role for a year and a half. So leaving Lausanne, I then left for the US and Canada, then 7 months in that part of the world, and
Oh,
then came back to Switzerland and went back to school for 3 years.
in Switzerland.
That's right. So I stayed
Mhm.
back home, my mom's place again, and then commuted to school in Switzerland.
Right. And I know for those of us in the US, we'd be like, you commuted from one country to another, but you and I have discussed this. It would be like going almost from one town to the next here, or even one
That's
state
right.
to
The school was half an hour away. So
Yeah.
it's almost intra-city for most people in the US. Yes.
Yes, and it's not like you have to produce your passport every time you cross the border. You just go from one place to the next. So I'm curious though, the 7 months, that you decided to improve your English. Like, part of me says, why 7 months? And did you travel throughout that time, or were you attached to an English school? How did you decide 7 months, and where did you
Well,
go in
I
the
just
U.S.
thought
and
that
Canada?
before starting school, kind of in between the job and school,
Ah,
that was kind of a
okay.
good period
I
to
see.
make most out of it. Because I had resigned in the one place, my school started at a
Right.
specific point in time.
Ah,
So I knew that there was plenty of time. But the same way I kind of chose wisely when I went to France, when everyone went to an English-speaking country, I wanted to go to a place where I would not run into any German-speaking student. I decided to go to New Haven, Connecticut. And I
all
can tell
right.
you, no
Nobody was.
other Liechtenstein Swiss German
No?
student had New Haven on their map. It was just freezing cold. There were a group of Korean students, and there were obviously communication issues between them and I.
Oh,
And then there was a large community of South American students
oh, interesting.
speaking mainly Spanish and Portuguese, and they
Oh,
didn't bother having me around. The first book that I bought when in the US was a Spanish English dictionary because I had to somehow communicate with the other students, and they didn't bother speaking to me in English. So I had
hmm
to pick up some Spanish. But it was another great experience. And I then finished school after 2 months. And then I went to Sao Paulo for a month
Oh, wow.
with some of the students that I had been with. And from there, went to Vancouver for another 4 months and
I
then back to Europe. Yeah.
The thing about New Haven is, people might say, well, you were near Yale University. That would be at least a place of, an international crowd, let's say. But I understand that wasn't the draw.
No,
Um,
it wasn't. But the funny thing was that an MBA had always been on my list. So I
mhm.
thought one day I'll return to the US for an MBA. So that was because I went to the Yale campus obviously a number of times
Mhm.
during my time in New Haven.
Yeah.
But then I also went up to Boston and then Harvard, Columbia University
Mhm.
in New York.
Yeah.
So I went to all of those places and thought one day young Roman will return to the US and do an MBA. And almost that's the way it happened, but just not that way.
Interesting.
Yeah, ultimately then turned out to be the alt-MBA, so the alternative MBA
Uh-huh.
by Seth Godin that I ended up doing,
Uh-huh.
which was one of the major moments in my career where
Mm.
things changed dramatically.
Mhm.
But the idea of the MBA stayed with me for almost decades.
Mhm. But you said you did go back to Switzerland and go to business school. So that not an MBA? That was not an MBA
Well,
because you still
well,
had to get a
that was
different
a
type of
bachelor.
degree?
That's right, kind of a
Right.
bachelor degree
Right.
in business administration in 3 years, building on the apprenticeship but making it a bit more
Right.
solid.
I see.
And that puts you at the level of those who would have gone to uni and then would have done a
Right.
bachelor degree. Just the path would have been a different one. But yeah, it opens up the possibilities of employment in
Right.
other areas as well.
Mhm.
So in that sense, it's the right thing to do to expand your job opportunities.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's funny. I mean, you said that. Now it makes perfect sense to me. In my mind, I'm thinking, well, he already has work experience. He's done all these other things. He's going for the master's degree in Switzerland. But I skipped over the bachelor's because it almost seemed like you had so many other experiences and you spoke all these languages and you had all these other skills. Part of me saying, who needs the bachelor's degree, right?
That's right.
But
It's kind of that
you know,
academic foundation. That's right.
yeah.
That academic foundation that was missing. And
Hmm.
ultimately, when you then look for a job,
Yeah.
then employers really have the choice. So they can
Right.
choose someone who
Yeah.
would have done the
Yeah.
academic course, or they would choose someone who would have been a bit more practical, so to say,
Right.
who would have worked already, so his work experience would have been abroad, would have studied languages.
Yeah.
Depending on the job and the expectations of the job, you
Hmm.
might want to go for one or the other. So not
Hmm.
necessarily better or worse,
Yeah.
but very different profiles to choose from.
Yeah. So it's an interesting picture that you're painting, at least I find it interesting, from the age of 15 to 20, 21, let's say. You started out with getting a lot of guidance from family members. Your uncle had the typography shop and then he couldn't take you almost by default. Well, my cousin went into banking. I'm pretty good in math. I got into banking. Okay. And then it sounded like the desire to learn different languages is probably not that unusual for somebody growing up in Europe. You know, in the US, we all think the whole world should just speak English. You even stretched yourself further, bothering to learn some Spanish and then getting a nice invitation to go to Sao Paulo. And that you kept expanding yourself. And those were more your own choices about how you navigated those next couple of years. It sounds like at that point, you were driving the bus, so to speak, if I'm getting this right. But yet there
That's
was
right.
this
Yep.
natural curiosity on your part. You were paying your own way. And you landed back in Switzerland to go to school. And were you, for those 3 years, were you a student full time? Were you working at the
Yep.
same time?
Full-time student.
Yeah.
That's right. And then having graduated, then wanted to go to work in Zurich, where
Ah.
my girlfriend at the time, wife now, who
Mm.
had done the apprenticeship with me. So we've been together for quite some
Oh,
time.
that's
But
nice.
she's been studying in Zurich already. So I then joined Credit Suisse First Boston,
Hmm.
the investment banking arm of the Swiss bank. And from day one, I made it clear that I was in Zurich. The place I wanted to be
Hmm.
was New York. In every single review conversation that I had with my managers and managers of my managers, they always said, Roman wants to go to New York. But those were then challenging times. So those were the early 2000s.
Mm.
The dot-com bubble burst,
Yeah.
and lots of people
Hmm.
were being called home as
Yeah.
opposed to sent off.
Hmm.
And it was clear to me that that was probably not going to be happening anymore. Then I joined the Swiss bank within Credit Suisse Group, and we had child number two. We had an apartment in Switzerland, and we were a week from moving into our own flat when Credit Suisse and Credit Suisse First Boston, the two banks merged, and I was asked whether I wanted to take on the role in Hong Kong.
Ah.
And I always said, well, number one, Hong Kong isn't on the same side as New York. There must be a misunderstanding here. It's the wrong direction.
Yeah.
And number two, we just bought a flat and we're
Yeah.
moving in next week. But then I felt, well, this is just the opportunity. Okay. And whether it's, east or west, who cares anyway? It's far enough away. So I should probably do that. And given that I had the agreement with my wife that if an opportunity showed up, we would at
Hmm.
least have a conversation about it. We would consider.
Hmm.
And given that our kids were 4 and 1, we thought they're so young, it's probably not a bad time to move with them. So I was given the offer on a Friday morning. They said I should tell them by Monday.
Okay.
I said, I said, Monday's a public holiday. I said, oh, don't worry. Tuesday is more than enough. Great. Excellent. So I have one more day. By Tuesday, I went back to the office and said, we're going to go to Hong Kong. The new chapter opened up.
Wow.
That really changed a lot for us as a family, for me individually,
Yeah.
professionally as well,
How
because
so?
I was still the a young Roman from the dudes doing a banking apprenticeship by accident, and then being in a global financial center with proper banking professionals.
Oh.
And I never considered myself a banker anyway. I was just employed by a financial institution, but I had no interest in financial market whatsoever.
Hmm.
I love the international vibe. I love the intensity, the speed, and lots of really smart people around me that I could learn a lot from. So that was my interest in the role.
So I just want to go back for a moment. You were in Zurich working for the same bank. I love the distinction you make saying I didn't really identify as a banker. I was employed by a financial institution. I still kind of had that apprentice hat on at the same time, which tells me that you didn't assume you knew everything. You were learning and kind of didn't want to be put into a mold. But I'm curious, what were you doing for the financial?
Yes, working in the Treasury Department. The department is the bank within the bank. We were in charge of capital, funding, liquidity, so the entire balance sheet. And internal groups, they had to deal with Treasury when they were providing cash to the bank or requiring cash from the bank. They had to negotiate with the Treasury Department whether or not they got the funding, whether we took the funding, and at what price. And that was a reasonably low profile work up until the financial crisis in 2008, 2009.
Right.
So when I went to Hong Kong, nobody really cared about Roman. Nobody saw the benefit of having me around. So they just say, you sit quiet in the corner and make sure you don't disturb us from doing what we want to do. And then the crisis hit, and suddenly we're saying, oh, Roman, we need to talk. And, oh, Roman, you have to spend some time with me. And I said, Roman's busy. I'm just so busy. Put you on the list. But it was really from one day to another, from what do we need you for to I need to save my business. Because that was at the time a change for a lot of businesses because they either had no funding for their business or they had funding at the rate that was no longer commercial for their business. They had to find solutions and exemptions, etc. And they had to work through that with the Treasury guy to put that case forward to Zurich and New York. There was no way avoiding me.
So you were kind of a gatekeeper in a way.
That's right. That's right.
I know I'm oversimplifying this, but I have to because I wouldn't know the inner workings of all that. But I'm imagining, so prior to that, people were feeling like they didn't have much use for you. So what were you doing up until that point when they realized they did need you?
Well, there was still regulatory angle to it.
Sure.
There were still reports to be done and completed. There were still relationships to be developed and all of that. But it was all done in the background and nobody really cared. And suddenly, what it just showed me is I was still the same. I was equally smart or stupid pre and post. But perception was very different.
Wow.
Even today, the way I look at it is the environment obviously plays a fundamental role in how you are perceived.
Absolutely.
And the environment might just be in your favor, might be neutral, or might actually be against you. But it doesn't mean that you have to change as a result of it. Okay. And I just realized that very personally that really nobody cared about my presence much to everyone wanted to speak to me and everyone thought that my knowledge and my skills were important to them. And it's not that I had developed new skills overnight.
Right.
I had them all the time, but they were not of value or of interest to some of those groups. And suddenly they became valuable and really crucial to the existence of their business. I didn't think that I was useless when nobody thought my advice, nor did I think that I was super smart just because everybody stood in front of my office. And putting that into perspective taught me a very important lesson. How I value myself and how I value what I do and how I do it so important, and not make it dependent on the popularity level out there, which
Right.
is somehow dependent on factors that you cannot influence anyway.
I agree. I think too often people base their value on what they perceive other people are thinking, right? When they're not mind readers. Now, you had the experience of their behaviors changing dramatically, right? And yet you knew you were the same. What an amazing lesson to learn. And it sounds like you were able to stay and work there because you had a purpose in being there. You wanted to be somewhere else and you'd moved your family over there. You weren't there to make lots of friends.
Yep.
And so it worked for you. And you couldn't have anticipated this crisis in 2008 necessarily, although some people probably could have.
Right.
And so how long were you in Hong Kong for?
So we stayed for 4 years and then moved to Singapore, Morgan Stanley, an American bank that had just survived barely the crisis, had to change their business model from a broker-dealer model to a banking model. They were looking for people who had already seen a bank from the inside. And that's how they found me.
I see.
So I was poached by Morgan Stanley, and I thought, why would a global American bank want the apprentice from in their bank?
But I had yourself as an apprentice. Okay.
That's right. But I had the expertise at that time that they needed.
Yeah.
I never thought that when I did my apprenticeship in that small Liechtenstein bank that I would ever make it to a global American bank. And I thought, now that's interesting. I'm curious. What's it like on the inside of Morgan Stanley?
Yeah.
And I had a number of interviews and I had nothing to lose and was just curious where that would take me. So eventually I got hired, moved over from Credit Suisse to Morgan Stanley, and I spent 2.5 years with Morgan Stanley, both in Singapore and then in Zurich. That was when I put an end to my banking career.
Or your apprenticeship, as you put it.
That's right. I had gotten my Morgan Stanley t-shirt and walked away. And the thing is that once you're inside, they're just normal people. So I'd seen it. And in that sense, that's all I wanted to validate for myself. And then said, okay, that's it.
Yeah.
Let's move on.
And so when you decided that's it, what were you setting your sights on at that point? Were you looking to move back to Liechtenstein at that point, or?
So I had moved back to Europe with Morgan Stanley. So I worked in Zurich, lived in Liechtenstein.
Oh, you did?
Then,
okay.
Yeah, and then kind of completed my mission in Zurich with Morgan Stanley, and then joined my in-laws' trust company in Liechtenstein, which had never been on my agenda, but it got me work-wise back to Liechtenstein. It got me from a large global organization into a small organization. I had more space to create and develop something on my own as opposed to just being tiny element in a large global organization.
Right. Yeah. I see. And so while you were working with your in-laws, you started creating some of your own things as well. Is that right?
No, it was only then that I got into a platform called the Idea Channel, which I'm now a part of. But it's a platform that supports the execution of meaningful ideas. And when I first got to one of those camps, I realized that there were people out there with some crazy ideas that made no commercial sense whatsoever. And then you had lots of people supporting those crazy ideas and doing that pro bono for no other reason other than helping someone else. And I thought, what's this all about? What kind of world is that? And having experienced that, that really opened up my eyes to another world than the commercial, financial world that I had been a part of. And that led me serendipitous from one experience to another. I then attended a fool's workshop with a fool, how to become a fool. And that was on the personal side of things, probably the most intense 5 days of my life. I had never laughed or cried as much those 5 days. It was really a cleansing of everything that had held me back from everything that I've always wanted to do.
Huh.
So I came out of that work
Mhm.
and signed up for the alt-MBA right away.
I see.
And then I did the alt-MBA. And when I completed the alt-MBA, the next working day, I went to my in-laws and said, I'm done. I move on. And they said, to do what? I said, I have no idea, but I can do anything.
Wow. And
And
when was
that was 6 years ago. And I would not recommend to anyone to do the same in hindsight, but it was the most natural thing to do for me.
Yeah.
And the important thing there is that I wasn't running away from anything. I was pulled towards something else.
Right.
And I said, look, out there was a world waiting for me.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what, where, and when. I just have to move in that direction. But I don't know what it is that awaits me. I don't know what I'll be doing. But I have to go. But I'm not running away from you. Lots of people that I was completely crazy by now. Luckily, my wife and my 2 children, we literally sat around the table and I said, look, there is no other way to do this. We're in this together, okay? So we have to do this together. And the kids still being at school. And I said, look, I'm no different from you now. I'm just an apprentice or a student again. I don't know where this is taking us, but I have no choice. I have to do this. And you have to support me. And my wife had her own education that she was doing. And we were kind of 4 students sitting around the table, just agreeing on, we're going to do this.
We're going to do this, but we
income's-
don't know what this is.
That's right. Income is going to come down. The one thing that I'm really good at is math. And cash flows. So I'll take care of the cash flows, okay? But income will come down. And as we know, expenses have to come down too. If we manage to get that one right, it will work out, okay? And similar to the time with my mom as a single mother with 2 kids, and we all had to contribute to a bit of income through the apprenticeship and making sure expenses were not going up too highly. I think that experience helped me and the family to manage the process, because I'd say going from expat in Hong Kong to apprentice in I have no idea what back in Liechtenstein, that's quite a step.
Yeah.
But we've managed to get it all done, the 4 of us. Yeah.
So you had no idea what was next.
Right. So I had to do something rather than sit around and wonder what to do.
Yeah.
So I went to Zurich, where I was preparing for a mentorship with a group of young people who were on the verge of setting up an edible hemp business. They're not the one to smoke, but the one to eat. And would only be a mentorship or a part-time gig and nothing big. But while we were there in the same building, there was a baking guy, kind of a hipster baker in Zurich, who was a money manager turned baker. And then I asked to be introduced to him, which then happened on the spot. And the following week, we had a conversation, and he hired me as an intern for a month in his baking shop. And that just turned out to be the toughest month of my working life, because working in a baking shop is just both physically and mentally quite demanding, especially when you've spent most of your life sitting in a comfortable chair. It kind of changes everything. It really put me back into the position of an apprentice, because nobody cared what I had done before. I was in the baking shop and I was meant to bake. Whether or not I had worked in a bank, whether I was in Hong Kong or not, to prove myself again. And I remember the feedback I got on the first croissant that I rolled, and he said, Brown, it's really a bad croissant. It's okay, because as long as it improves over time, you'll do reasonably well. And then I just spent a couple of weeks in that baking shop. I slept in an office on a kind of a temporary bed in a sleeping bag, and I could shower in the basement. So I spent 23 hours a day in the baking shop, and it became my new life for a few weeks, which gave me lots of reflection and thinking time. But the
Wow.
most important finding from that was if I wanted something badly and I put everything into it and I was given the chance to prove myself,
Mm.
then I could do almost anything. That was at least
Wow.
what I walked away with. And that then got me right into my next trip to Nicaragua, where I went on a coffee farm training because I thought coffee would be something that I wanted to get into with a friend of mine.
Mm.
And we decided that I would do the coffee farm training, no idea of coffee, but learned again the craft of coffee making from scratch on the farm. That opened up an entirely new world to me and gave me the appreciation that I needed for the people that would somehow be involved in the craft that I would then be getting myself into. When I got back, my friend and I bought a vintage van and a coffee machine, and we started brewing coffee. He stayed in banking, but initially he helped me out because he was more knowledgeable than I. But after a while, he said, look, it's all good, but I have a proper job in a bank. So why don't you keep going? And I look at it from the sideline. That really kind of put me on the spot because I was always the one selling the coffee and he was making the coffee. I was good at talking and counting, not necessarily brewing coffee, but I was forced into that as a consequence of
Ah.
him stepping out. Given that I had said before alt-MBA that I could do anything, I thought, well, I just do this as well. In parallel, I ran my mobile coffee business and I started supporting the hemp guys, and that
Oh,
got me going on two different lines simultaneously
see.
and kept me entertained and generated a bit of cash flow and got me introduced to new people, to different areas of work and life that I hadn't experienced before. And it set me up for
Mm.
my second life, so to say.
So I want to make sure that I'm following this. You had this engagement with your in-laws trust company. You decided to leave that and you had the conversation with your family and you wanted to open up your learning. You joined alt MBA. You did the Fools workshop, which I think was the catalyst for really sparked, I think, the stepping into more. I need to learn. I need to explore. And
That's
then,
right.
yeah.
And it also took away the, let's call it, it took away the shame
Yes. Yeah.
of
Okay.
doing anything wrong because once you're acting in the role of the fool who by design is being laughed at, how bad could it get? And you really need to open up personally in order to play that role
Yeah.
because fundamentally the role of the fool is to pretty much mirror everything that you see and sense, and whatever you see that you then pick up and play with it. But in
Mm-hmm.
order to do that, you have to be a pretty blank sheet yourself. So in
Mm.
the old days, when the king asked the fool to give a performance, that was done with an objective to have a reflection of what was going on in the king's environment and also in the king's mind, because the fool was meant to pick it all up. The king wasn't interested in the luggage that the fool was carrying with himself. So the fool had to be a blank sheet, had to just pick up what was in the environment. And learning that craft or art of the fool really required me to get rid of my own baggage or deal with it at least
Yeah.
so that I could pick up more of my environment, notice more, and play with that in a way that was not about myself, but was more about the environment that I was a part of. And
Yeah.
that was life changing.
Yeah. Clearly, completely transformative. And I can imagine that having your family's support allowed you to free yourself up that much more to do these things.
That's
Right.
right. They had confidence in me. They
Nice.
had confidence in us as a family. And it just required everyone to contribute, to chip in one way or another.
Nice.
And that was also in terms of the personal relationships
Yeah.
between my wife and I, but also with the children.
Sure.
It just redefined that relationship because
Yeah.
we're really in the same boat. We're all contributing. We're all students or apprentices again.
Yeah.
And we had to kind of move that ship together. And there was nobody just sitting idle saying, I'm the youngest, none of my business. So everyone contributed. And it's
Yeah.
been really a fabulous experience for all of us the last couple of years.
I can imagine. And by including the children, what they've experienced has got to be tremendous. I have this conversation all the time with my clients is, do you talk to your children about the work you do? Do you share with them, not just whether you like it or not, but do you actually talk to them about what you like or don't like about it? Or do you share with them a conversation you might have had at work? Because where do our children learn about what it means to be an adult who's living their life on purpose in some way? Where do we learn that? We learn that from the adults who are around us, whether those are parents, grandparents, or other influential adults. And I know that's how I learned about what it meant to find work that was meaningful because my parents did that with us. But I don't know that a lot of other people, or at least I haven't come across that many people who had that. I think your kids have had this amazing window into what it means to make choices about how you spend those years in your life. So I was curious when you were going to Zurich, taking on this mentorship in the hemp business, and then going into baking for a brief period. I thought maybe you had ditched the hemp people, but it sounds like it was a both and. You were curious about the baking, but you were still engaged with the hemp people. Yet your role with them was to help them, but you were also learning about the business as well.
That's right.
Right.
And getting myself ready into the mindset to be the mentor, supporting them,
Mhm.
but also starting myself again in something
Right.
new and taking that experience over into that other venture and say, I don't know much about what this is all about. I don't know much about the plant and the entire process of growing it and producing food on the back of it. But given that I'm ready to test myself in that field, I
Yeah.
think I can contribute both my
Right.
curiosity that I bring to
Right.
the table and the experience from whatever I've done before.
And then you had this friend who had a window into the coffee farm, and that's what came next. It sounds like that may have already been on the horizon as well when
That's
you
right.
jumped.
That was on the horizon,
Yeah.
but it then just became, or as you say, the window of opportunity
Mhm.
to visit the farm just opened and I just
Mhm.
grabbed it. And from there, we got the coffee business going, which put
Yeah.
me into an entrepreneurial spirit and
Yeah.
exposed myself to the end consumer and the kind of hospitality experience. Creating welcoming experiences is what really got me
Yeah.
excited, to
Yeah.
be honest.
And so is that what you're doing today? I thought things have changed a little bit since then. Am I reading
Right.
that right? Yeah.
So eventually then, so I got deeper into the hemp business, but then moved out of it operationally and, ceded my space to someone else and then got into other ventures that I had been offered. So
Oh.
the coffee guy who I had met in Nicaragua, he set up an oat drink cooperative in Switzerland.
Oh.
And he then pulled me into that one. And another friend had became the managing director of a association that was meant to change the way we looked at agriculture in Liechtenstein. And
Wow.
she then said, I have something for you here. And both of those examples were interesting because both of them said, look, Roman, we have a role to fill. We don't really know what we need. We don't really know what it entails, but we need someone who's curious about exploring that field,
Mhm.
who's very flexible both in terms of timing and mindset, and someone who's happy with not that much. So it turned out to be my high level of flexibility and being happy with not so much put me on top of the list of candidates. And eventually I got into those as well. So by now, I still run my coffee truck myself.
Oh, you do?
Then
Okay.
I'm the managing director of that oat drink business and the salesperson for agricultural produce in Liechtenstein. And
Wow.
then besides that, I have another friend who I do various communication projects with that we just ran a traveling exhibition through the country on the subject of discrimination, where we had more than 1,000 school children attending the program. And that was just on the back of an idea that we had. And we just thought, then, why don't we set up that exhibition and let it go through the country? There was no plan to have so many kids attending, but it just happened that way. It just shows that I get asked by a lot of people now whether this or that would be something for me. And it means that I don't really have to come up with the great ideas myself anymore, to be very honest. Things get introduced to me, presented to me,
Mm.
and then I can primarily choose who I want to work with. I'm less focused on the subject matter. I'm
Yeah.
so much more interested in who I would be working with. And that's kind of the attitude that I have now, and which means that the portfolio that I'm managing right now, companies and activities and projects, is reasonably fluid. So it's meant to evolve and it's meant to change, and it contributes enough to make a living.
Yeah.
Some of these pay well, others don't pay at all. And it's the weighted average that really makes it enough for the time being. And it's up to me now to manage this so proactively that I keep getting excited about what I do, who I do the work with.
Yeah.
And it just makes ends meet at the end of the day.
And it feels right. I mean, it sounds like when you say I'm more interested in who I work with than exactly what I'm working on and then what it is they're putting in front of you, there still has to be the right combination of what it is that they're asking you to do or what they'd like you to work on and how and what the right blend is within your portfolio that produce some cash flow that might take some time to get there or may not. I would imagine this program on discrimination is not a profit maker for you.
Definitely not, no. But it contributes to my well-being, so to say.
Absolutely.
Given that I get something from it that is way beyond the monetary value of it. Ultimately, it's the mix. And the initial conversation really is, and that goes back to what I think that I'm good at, which is I can count and I can talk. So if there is a counting element and a talking element in it, then the probability of me being able to contribute something is reasonably high.
Love it. It almost feels like I can imagine there being like a pseudo mathematical formula, you know. If I can count and talk and that there has to be the right blend and then that has to equal a certain ratio or something of contribution with the right people. And it would be a qualitative formula, let's say, right? And that's it for you. And we could print that on t-shirts and sell them.
Absolutely. Right? That's it. But as you say, there is a pattern in it. So it's
Yeah.
not just completely random
No.
and, unrelated.
Yeah.
And it's exactly the elements that you've picked out that really flow into the process of choosing one over the other. Yeah.
I think, though, the path that you've taken to get there, to see that pattern or to build that, and the pattern changes to some degree, and it's really unique to you. It's not like somebody else could say, oh, I'm going to follow this framework that Roman has developed. It's like, no, don't even try this at home, folks, right? It's like, you let Roman be Roman.
That's right. So that's the heavy disclaimer. It works for me, which is great, but it is rather unique in the way that it's been built. I came across that other quote by Steve Jobs where he said that, you cannot connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them backwards.
Right.
And me now telling the story, it somehow, well, at best makes partially sense. Whereas at the time, I definitely, couldn't make sense of it myself, nor would I have been in a position to explain my grand plan to anyone so that anyone would nod and say, good one, Roman,
Yeah.
I suggest you do that. So
Yeah.
it really only happened in hindsight that I
Yeah.
can say, now looking at it with everything that I know today,
Yeah.
I can see that I managed to connect some of the dots at the right point in time, but it's impossible to do that
Yeah.
upfront.
Well, it's like you've created your own brand of entrepreneurship. You bring all your experience and expertise to the table, apprentice mindset at the same time. That's what it feels like. You're always looking to learn. You don't have to know everything, and you stay open and curious as you go forward. And the thing that I often come back to with anyone who finds themselves feeling satisfied and fulfilled with what they're doing, it usually comes back to what are the relationships that they've fostered and nurtured along the way? What are the relationships they're in now? I find that those relationships are far more important than what they're actually doing day to day. I think that's what you're demonstrating here is you're saying, I have these relationships with these people, and you said it very clearly. Choosing who I work with is definitely the first lens that you look through when you decide if you're going to engage with a new project.
Absolutely. Well, it's definitely, if I were to give it a name, then it would definitely be a relationship model. There are some skills attached to the model,
Oh, yeah.
obviously,
Yeah.
because ultimately the work needs to be done,
Sure.
but it's built on relationships. And given that the relationships are my primary focus point, it makes it so much easier for me to kind of navigate in a world that has so many opportunities to offer. It makes it easier to ultimately make the right choices, or
Yeah.
turns out to be the right choices.
So, Roman, if anybody wanted to be in touch, what would be the best place for them to find you?
LinkedIn
Okay.
definitely is.
We will put that in the show notes. And one final question before we wrap up. You've made a number of changes and transitions over the course of your professional life. What would be a key piece of advice that you would give someone listening to this in terms of how they might navigate their way to what's next for them?
I'd say that the universe isn't your enemy. So it's not that the world's against you in terms of what you try to achieve. And
Mm-hmm.
as long as you move, things will evolve with you. But
Mm,
it's the steady movement. It doesn't have to involve running all the time,
right.
but it's the steady movement
Yeah.
that brings the universe onto your side.
I love that. Roman, thank you so much for being here. This has been fascinating, enlightening, and informative. And I wish you the best going forward in all of your adventures. I certainly will be keeping in touch and following your next steps. So thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Tammy. It's been a great pleasure talking to you, and we shall keep in touch. Sure.
Definitely. Thanks. Thanks for sticking around to the end of my interview with Roman Eggenberger. What is your key takeaway from our conversation? If you are interested in any of the resources mentioned in today's podcast, you can find them in the show notes on my website at tammygoulerloeb.com/podcast. Just look for episode 254. And while you're there, you can also subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss any episodes. And if you're feeling it, please help me to inspire more people to grow their careers by clicking on the Apple Podcasts button right there. Leave an honest rating and brief review. Those ratings and reviews draw people to see the podcast so they can also be inspired to move their careers forward. Are you anticipating your next professional move? Check out my award-winning book, Work from the Inside Out, Break Through 9 Common Obstacles and Design a Career That Fulfills You. It's available through my website, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, independent bookstores, or through your local library. You can also help sustain the podcast by buying me a cup of coffee at buymeacoffee.com/TammyGL. Since this podcast is self-funded, your support is acknowledged and appreciated. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, it's never too late or too impossible to increase your sense of fulfillment and satisfaction in your work and other meaningful activities. Let me know how it's going for you. I'd love to hear from you. Bye for now.